Welcome everyone to Innovations in Global Education. We're going to get started in just a minute. So we still have many participants joining us. So welcome, and we're going to get started in just another minute. For those of you just joining us, welcome. We're going to get started in just one more minute, but I know you must be looking forward to what is going to be a really fantastic panel. So welcome everyone. We're up to nearly 700 participants. I want to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Bridget Long, and I am the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this special broadcast of HGSE's Education Now series, developed in response to the unprecedented challenges that the education sector is facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This series has welcomed guests whose leadership, expertise, and vision are uniquely positioned to drive the sector forward. We hope that what we surface in these conversations will provide hope, add fuel to the push for equity, and create circumstances for transformation across education. Before I introduce our event today, I want to let you know that you can find closed caption access and Chinese interpretation at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can also submit your questions using the Q&A button. Today's episode is being recorded and will be available to view on the Harvard Education YouTube channel and Facebook page. You can also visit hgse.me/ednow for recordings and information about future episodes. I'm especially pleased that today's episode is being presented in conjunction with the Yidan Prize Foundation, which was founded by Dr. Charles Chen Yidan. The Yidan Prize is an inclusive education award that recognizes individuals and teams who have contributed significantly to education research and development. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Yidan Foundation for the work they do to create a better world through education. Now, I am delighted to welcome our guests. They are members of the inaugural Yidan Council of Luminaries, created to bring together educational experts from multiple disciplines to work on real-world problems impacting millions of children who are marginalized by today's systems. We have four of the luminaries with us today. First, we have Anant Agarwal, who is founder and CEO of EdX and a professor of electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. Next, we have Usha Goswami, a professor of cognitive developmental neuroscience at the University of Cambridge and the founding director of the Center for Neuroscience and Education. Next, and our moderator will be Thomas Kane, who is the Walter H. Gale Professor of Education and Economics here at HGSE and the faculty director of the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard University. And finally, Angeline Murwa is the executive director for Chemfed of Africa, which works to remove barriers to girls' education. Please join me in welcoming them as I turn it over to the moderator for today's conversation, our very own luminary, Tom Kane.
Thanks, Bridget. So we're together on this panel today because Dr. Chen had an idea back in 2013 to launch a foundation to push the boundaries of innovation in education. Dr. Chen's father was the first college graduate from his village in Guangdong, And then his son went to go on to co-found one of the largest technology companies in the world. In reflecting on our panel this week, I realized that although we come from very different backgrounds and our professional work is very different, the one thing that ties us together is that somewhere deep down, we're all motivated by the same idea that motivated Dr. Chen, to spread the transformative power of education to more people around the world. It's a basic, visceral belief in the power of education that we share. So, given that common mission, the goal of this panel today is to share the barriers that each of us is seeing and to think about the role of the international community in removing those barriers. So, Anant, there's a lot of excitement about the potential of using technology to spread education globally. EdX, I think you're now offering more than 3,000 courses, 15,000 instructors, 110 million course enrollments so far. What are the key obstacles or limiting factors to spreading access to higher education to adults globally?
The education is a human right. And on the one hand, as a human right, everybody should have access to it like the air we breathe. But global access to education has been sorely limited. Technology has improved virtually every field known to mankind. Anybody anywhere can play a video game. Anybody anywhere can watch videos. But at the same time, education has not made it to everybody around the world. And to me, the key has been that we have not thought long and hard about how to apply technology, which has completely changed every field, how to apply technology to learning and education in a way that can dramatically increase access to every child, every college-going student, every lifelong learner all over the world. At edX, which was founded by Harvard and MIT about 10 years ago, we applied technology to education and built a learning platform that anybody anywhere in the world can access when they go to edX.org. There, they can learn virtually for free courses from amazing professors at Harvard or MIT or Cambridge or Oxford or Tsinghua in China, Hong Kong University in Hong Kong, and pretty much some of the great universities all over the world. And today we have close to 40 million learners from every single country in the world, learners from the ages of 5 years all the way to 98 years, accessing learning. So I think if we have the will and we can use technology in the service of humanity, I think we can make a big dent in increasing access to everybody everywhere.
So Usha, as a neuroscientist, you study how children learn to read. What do you see as the potential as well as the dangers for using technology to help younger children, not just the adults Anant is working with, learn to read? What are the most exciting developments you're seeing, and what are some of the dangers?
I think that for younger children's learning, it's very important that it's individualized and child-centered, and that you're responding to the child in the moment. So we know from the science base on how we optimize learning in the early years that we really need this to be aware of the social brain, that we're social creatures and we like to interact with others. So even though there can be some technologies for younger children, like, for example, the reading technology Grapho Game, which I helped develop, which is a research-based app in over 20 languages and still counting, developed originally by Finnish researchers. Something like that can be beneficial for a particular skill. But overall, I think if you're trying to bring all children forward, then for younger ages, it's more useful to have technology that can support their teachers or their mentors and be used in the moment with an individual child to help the more socially based aspects of learning, but using the best known methods.
So Anant, how could the technologies you've been working with in edX be used to support the adults working with younger children?
As I've talked to teachers all over the world, I've not heard a single teacher say, hey, look, I don't want to use technology, or I don't want to create more access to education for children all over the world. What they lack is, they tell me, I don't know how to do it. Help me, you are making available all these resources, but I don't quite know how to apply it for the children, how to create blended models of learning where teachers can work with technology and sort of in a commingled fashion to help learners. I think the one big place we can make a big impact is to train teachers. Usha is completely right that for younger children, having a human being present can create a much more engaging experience, particularly if that human being the teacher is able to use technology in service of learning. So we can create teacher training programs for teachers all over the world. And just as examples, we have launched a number of courses on edX to train people, teachers, in how to create blended learning, for example. So we have an online course to train teachers on how to use technology in the classroom. And so we have tens of thousands of teachers taking courses like that. There's another example where IIT Bombay in India launched an edX-based site where they are training tens of thousands of teachers all over India in terms of helping them understand how to use technology and how to just teach better. So there are many ways in which we can use technology to train teachers at huge scale.
So, Angie, Chemfed has provided access to education for 4.8 million girls in Africa. That's 4.8 million lives changed. Could you describe your work and the barriers you're facing and just what the global community could be doing to help?
Thanks so much, Tom. And I just want to say that Chemfed does more than supporting access to education. We also support the young women graduates into secure leadership and secure livelihoods and leadership. So I'm just so proud to say that and to share with the world that 4.8 million children that were supported by Chemfed, of those 2.1 million were supported by young women like myself. We were once clients. I'll say that again. These were young women who were supported by Chemfed through school and came together as Chemfed Association of Women Leaders, paying it forward. So the 2.1 million of the 4.8 million were supported by this constituency of young women emerging from our work. So this association now numbers over 178,000 young women and grows year on year as more young women graduates. We are, as an organization, actively creating a new generation of educators and entrepreneurs with the financial and human capital to support more children in their communities, driving up not just the quality of education, but also ensuring that there's access to education and there's equity in the system. You asked me a very specific question on what could the global community be doing to help. And I like the points that have already come from Anant and from Usha around technology, but also around ensuring that there is a sufficient knowledge shared on learning difficulties and researches that are coming up. I just have got 3 key points that I want to share around what the world could do to be able to assist in this. And particularly post-COVID, the most important thing to do is let's build upfront, build forward, and let's build for equity. So number one, the biggest barrier to children, let's meet the cost of individual girls to access education. And we know pre-COVID, there were over 52 million girls who were out of school. That's in sub-Saharan Africa alone. Let us give them the same chance that I got, and the chance to break the vicious cycle of poverty. Secondly, I think it is important to raise the awareness of the agency, the magnitude, and the nature of the problems of girls' exclusion. I just also want to do a newsflash here that it is not the culture of African communities to exclude girls from school. The number one reason is poverty and a basic of school supplies. I know this from my own personal experience of having struggled to even stay in primary school, let alone in high school, until Chemfed came in and supported my family to keep in school. So I just want to say most families know too well the value of education. It is not culture, it is poverty. Number 3, let's raise the awareness of promising solutions and the potential unleashed by girls' education. I just shared one example with you here today. Of the 4.8 million children supported by Chemfed to date, 2.1 million was by girls who got the break that they needed, an opportunity to break the vicious cycle of poverty for their families. So let's think equity. Let's think every child should not be left behind. Thank you.
So Usha, you study how human brains are wired and how that wiring affects how students learn to read. So we need to make sure that the lessons you're learning are being used not just by teachers in Cambridge, England, where you live, but by the teachers working with Angie's students in Africa. Like, are there mechanisms for spreading the insights around, teaching literacy around the world?
I think the international research community is trying to do that. So, for example, GraphoGame has developed a number of versions in African languages. But the whole enterprise behind things like the Yidan Foundation is to try and bring together in one place different sources of expertise so that there can be more cross-fertilization of knowledge between different expertise in different countries that could actually benefit children across the world. And I would just like to pick up on the point Angie mentioned about learning difficulties, because we know that learning difficulties affect around 10% of children in every society. This was research I looked at for the UK government foresight report. These are biologically based differences. These children have a slightly different way of, for example, processing auditory information, which might affect their reading, or processing visual information. But that makes it even more important that we support those children. They're a massive resource for their country, 10% of the educational population. And yet something like the pandemic has really caused those children extra problems, because it's very hard to access online learning if you can't read. So this is another group that's kind of got overlooked and left out of the technological revolution, these children with learning difficulties who might need more support. But as Angie said, it's much better to give that support early so that these children can go on to flourish than to not put the support in place and then later they can't contribute to the society in the same way as other children.
One of the things that this COVID pandemic this year has highlighted is just differences in access to technology, at least in the US, and I'm sure in poor countries globally as well. Like, does the international community have a role to play in expanding access to technology? And like, how would that, how might that work? And are there efforts underway that we should know about? That's a question for any of the three of you.
Tom, I'm happy to take a crack at it. I was at the World Bank talking to the leadership a few years ago, and they were talking about giving, billions upon billions of dollars as loan guarantees and outright grants to many of the poorer countries, and a lot of the money would be spent on building buildings. And one piece of advice I had for them, they said, look, Anant, this vision of universal access to education and technology is huge. How can we help? So one piece of advice I gave them was that today we have a very bricks and mortar culture. And I recommended we need to be thinking about a bits and bytes culture. You could provide a certain amount of money and build a physical building or a school or a college or some institution. Alternatively, you can spend some of the money to make sure that everybody has universal access to the internet and electricity. And so many of the worldwide agencies and governments should be investing in infrastructure, particularly the internet. And the reason is that content is becoming widely available. And so those that have access to the internet can get broad access to content and can rapidly improve their lives and careers. And so this infrastructure needs to happen. And I think any advice, any government folks listening in, think about how to expand a bits and bytes infrastructure as much as you expand the bricks and mortar infrastructure. And that will enable an exponential increase in access to a lot of the free content and free learning that is available out there.
So Angie, like we can't ignore the fact that, again, that the world is emerging from the COVID pandemic. Like, how has COVID affected the schools that you work with?
Tom, the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, has been brutal. It not only revealed, it also deepened structural inequalities across the world. We know every country has been hit. It's not just the schools that I work with or the communities that I work with, but we also know that the impacts are unevenly felt. And the worst hit are those already disadvantaged or marginalized. And this can be either by gender or by place of birth, unfortunately, by access to resources, even by where they find themselves in. And this continues, as we know, to reflect the brutal inequality that characterize our world. So just talking about what's giving me sleepless nights right now, cases of COVID, is the first thing that I think of is just the worsening of all the barriers we've been grappling with over the years, that it already pushed girls out of school, that are pushing girls out of school. And this includes such issues as poverty, hunger, and we know that it results in teen pregnancies, early marriages, and exploitation of women. We know that exclusion from education impacts on a girl's life now, but also for life. The second worry that gives me sleepless nights, cases of COVID, is, I think to Anant's point, the immense digital divide. We know that technology served those that it could serve and those that those that could access it. But for those that did not have the means, they were left behind. And I'm talking about particularly communities that, organizations like ourselves, Chemfed, work with, where there is no internet penetration, the data costs are too high. The parents or children and families have to make a decision on whether they buy data bundles for a child to connect to learning or actually put food on the table. That's a cruel, near impossible choice. And just the lack of hardware. And that's why I like the point Anant brought in around, infrastructure, building the infrastructure around bits and bytes. So, and then the third thing for me, besides the immense digital divide, is linked to the above as well, is just a lack of efficient investment in education, and particularly the lack of basic facilities in rural schools. And I just want to give, a very tangible example. COVID demands additional resources to facilitate just adherence to protocols. I want to give something that's a basic human right, like just water. A lot of the schools in the communities we work with do not have access to water. And imagine a lack of access to water in a context of COVID and what that means. We're talking about social distancing, but the classroom sizes are impossible. So I can go on, but I just want to say COVID has been brutal. But now we have a time to build and an opportunity to build forward, acting on the pandemic/lessons, to build equity into the system, to think about those that are hardest hit by it, the reality of those that are most marginalized. If we can do that, that system will work for everybody.
So earlier in the discussion, we were talking about, ways in which technology, and Anant was describing how technology could be used to train teachers and to share like the latest lessons learned by folks like Usha with teachers in working with children around the world. But I'm just trying to get a sense of just magnitudes, like roughly what percentage of the schools that you work with currently would have access to the technology and the internet access to participate in that kind of training? I'm just trying to figure out how much the problem is access and technology versus, the content that we could deliver?
I wouldn't want to try and fly, and flight statistics or all that. I'll give you an example of, I think the context that, like in Zimbabwe, where we know over 70% of schools in Zimbabwe are rural. And as much as there's significant internet penetration in context, that's not the only challenge. The data costs are phenomenal. So there's need to invest in the data costs for that to happen. And as well as just the hardware, particularly, I think about children, but I also think about teachers, that they need the actual smartphones hardware to be able to do this. It's amazing that such a basic right, which everybody could look at as, it's a given, is such a luxury and beyond the reach of many. So I think for me, that's what I just want to point out, that it's an imperative, it's an urgent issue, because unfortunately, I think for the world, COVID has proved that we cannot have a them and us mentality. COVID has proved that we are one village. We are so interlinked and interconnected. We will rise and fall together as the world. And so it's critical that we continue to be sensitive to the constituencies that do not have the access to such resources. Personally, I didn't see a computer until I was 20. That's how tragic it is. And the majority of schools we work with, I'm talking schools, not even individuals within schools. Schools do not even have a computer, let alone the students and individuals within that school. So it is a dire situation. And that's why I like the approach around blended approach as we build into infrastructure and everything. But the injustice of it is heartbreaking.
And if I might add, Tom, if I might add something to what
please.
My colleagues, Angeline just mentioned, but there have been many experiments around the world where an outside agency has gone in and dumped a whole bunch of computers in a school. And it's exactly what it is. It's a dump of computers. If you just do one piece, it does not help. You really have to solve the end-to-end problem. You need to give them low-cost computation. Second, you need to provide data access. So we work with some organizations in Africa where access to EdX is 0 rated, which means that the cell phone, the carriers will give you free access to data. There are mechanisms to do that where they can give you free access to education to certain websites. And then third, you have to be able to provide the content. And then fourth, you have to train the teachers. Because if you just provide technology, it's a pile of junk unless you train the teachers and provide the content. So you need an end-to-end solution, the device, the data, teacher training, and 0 rating the content. You need all 4.
Can I just chime in very fast there? I love what I just talked about there, because I think that's the major problem that we have faced in most contexts, the issue of dumping hardware. And I love the holistic approach he's talking about, because I think we need to keep it in mind that respect matters. It is important to be relevant and responsive to local needs. I can think of many multiple examples around, technology being dumped and not working, but I also know of, models where it's worked. So I was just thinking about all that we're talking about right now, right? Where we're talking about new researches that are coming up. I loved hearing, Usha talking about these are biological issues around performance of children. And then talking about technology, which Anant is talking about, and just thinking, how do we bring this together for me is phenomenal, because it is not about one piece. It's about bringing all these 3 pieces together. It is about a multidimensional approach to education, because children by their very nature are not just one-sided. They are human beings. I'll stop there.
So Anant and Angie, so we've just been talking about this holistic approach, which sounds right to me, but the challenge there is, Anant, you only could work on one part of that. And there would have to be somebody else working with the data providers. There'd have to be somebody else working on the providing the hardware in the schools. There'd be who's doing the coordination? Are there any entities out there that can do that kind of coordination. Maybe that's one of the barriers.
Tom, I've seen this happen so many times where everybody in the food chain says, it's not worth it for me to do my part because nobody else is doing their part. I think if I just go about and do my part, things will work. So for example, edX launched edX Online Campus for free. It's a way for any college. This is for higher secondary institutions. Any college anywhere in the world can access our entire a catalog that we've created for them for free. So if you're any matriculated student at a university or college anywhere in the world, they can sign up and access all our content for free. So we need to do our part. And frankly, if we do our part, other people will also do their part. I don't think we should be pointing fingers and saying, look, others are not doing their part. And the world is moving in the right direction. If you look at mobile devices, our platform is available in mobile. And the World Bank says that every single part of the world will have data access by 2025. We are not that far off. It's just 3 or 4 years away. Everybody will have access to bandwidth. Mobile phones, I was in India in a village, and I remember a picture where there was a child. He must no older than 6 years. He was sitting in a bullock cart, and he was driving, the 2 bullocks, and he was carrying a load of hay. And guess what he was doing? He had a whip in one hand for the bullocks, and guess what he had in his second hand? He was watching video on a phone in the other hand.
Yeah, but could I please remind everybody, technology is not the answer to the global education for all ages. I think it's really important. Younger children, obviously he was having fun with his mobile phone, but that wouldn't be the same as learning from a teacher in a way that will develop his education. And I really don't think that technology is the answer for younger children. What's the answer is making teachers have more, empowering the teachers and giving them a better way of interacting with children, understanding that there may be learning difficulties, understanding how important it is to go from where the child is at that point in time, and how to best help children to flourish through the kind of social engagement that we already know matters at community level and at school level. So another message for governments would be to think about resourcing the child, think about resourcing the individual child rather than building a new building. But what does that child and that child's family need and that child's teacher need in order to help that child to thrive? Because I think we're falling into this trap of thinking technology will do everything. Technology won't do everything because we are social creatures with social brains. And especially for young children, it's all about becoming part of your learning environment and thriving because people care about how you're getting on, not because your mobile phone gives the right beeps when you press the right buttons.
So Usha,
can I comment, Thomas?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I love what we're talking about here and where this conversation is going. And I want to agree that I think the most important thing as we deal with the education crisis globally is actually collaborating. It's everybody doing what they can do the very best way they can, but bringing it all together. And I just want to give a very quick example of the 3 of us we're talking about, learning difficulties and technology, right? So quickly, I come from a context where there is a lot of myths, misconceptions, and taboos about living with disabilities. Learning difficulties are almost ignored and perceived as more an inconvenience to adults, including, of course, the overworked teacher, who might now adjust their approach to accommodate such children. Most have no idea, I think to Anna's earlier point, they have no idea how to navigate this. Their ignorance, unfortunately, is often then perceived as they don't care, they are not concerned. There's a lot of blame shifting and all this. But just talking about collaboration, right, and bringing all these, I said this for me as various pieces to an education puzzle. None is more important than the other. If we do that, then I think we're doing an injustice to the children we're supposed to serve. We're supposed to look at every innovation as critical to the education puzzle piece. So let's just imagine this, right? If we can use technology to get what Usha, you were talking about, that, this is, let's understand learning difficulties. I went through school with students that were just labeled dumb, But I believe that the system failed them because the system didn't understand their needs, right? So if we can use technology to get this to communities or to teachers or educational specialists or education activists who don't know it, then we are combining two very unique, special niches to be able to make a difference in people's lives. But I know, and to the earlier point around dumping, right, that it's not enough to just have this on a computer, on an app, or whatever. But I want to give an example around contextualizing technology and contextualizing education, and particularly our like Chemfed's Learner Guide program. So Learner Guides are young women who have been educated in, like who have gone through school, the first in their communities to go this far. And they've committed to support the next generation in their communities. And they work with their communities to be able to address various barriers in their communities. And what I just want to be able to say is that during COVID, for example, they were critical in decoding World Health Organization information. Some of it that was very scientific, and most of it that was in English. They decoded it not just to local language by translation, but also make it make sense for people in the communities, using local examples, using local models, referencing what has happened before. So what I'm just trying to say here is this goes both ways. It is not just about technology or research coming to communities. It's also about working with local communities, with people at the front line of the problem, actually informing research, but also informing technology, making sure that all these three pieces are working together in service to the children who we are trying to actually transform. So I do think that for me, none is more superior than the other. If we continue to compete and whatever, we're actually doing an injustice to the children. Let's look at how do we collaborate for equity? How do we collaborate respectfully? How do we make this meaningful? It is not about who's doing better. It is about the best for the child in this generation while we can.
So I'm just seeing some of the questions that our listeners have sent in, and I was just going to ask the panelists, like, how has the COVID pandemic like affected your work, and like what are you hoping to see over the next year or two? What's the most exciting thing that you see for helping children catch up from this learning loss that we've all experienced this year?
Well, even though England is a first world country, I've seen a lot of the children in our project. So these are children with dyslexia or specific language impairments, really having fallen behind because their families haven't got the resources to access the online offerings from their schools. So it isn't only in Africa where some children have been much more disadvantaged by COVID, it's also in first world countries. There's a lot of inequality, and there isn't anything particularly exciting, I don't think. At the moment, the world's education systems aren't really quite sure what to do. I mean, they could have just missed out a whole year, for example, so that everybody started again. That might have been a bit more equitable, because then the children who never got the online learning would be in the same place as the children who could access everything. But that's probably not a sensible suggestion. But I think any government that can try and resource by the child, the point that Angie made, that children have different needs. And if we want to support everybody in having an optimal education, we need to support those individually different needs. That would be a very good use of funding.
Tom, if I could add quickly to this. COVID, despite having wreaked such havoc around the world, but COVID has presented us with an incredible one-time opportunity. Before COVID, only 3% of the world was learning online. In March of last year, when COVID hit and became much bigger around the world, 100% of the world began to learn online. And what we are seeing in the future is a future where the world is not going ratchet back to 3% online. We are seeing that the world is going to gravitate to a new normal, which is going to be a blended normal where both technology-enabled learning and in-person learning will coexist in classrooms all over the world. Is it going to be 50-50? I don't know. But blended learning is going to be the new normal. On edX, for example, in the month of April of last year, we saw a 10-fold increase tenfold, not 10%, increase in the number of learners coming in to learn online. We enrolled 5 million new students in 1 month alone in April, which equaled all of the number of learners we enrolled in the year 2019. And so the COVID had created this huge pressure for people to find new ways to learn and learn remotely. I think the future is going to be not just a mix of working remotely and working in person, but also learning will become a combination. So I think here there's a huge opportunity for us to take this advantage or take this new affordance that COVID has forced on the world and to actually turn it to our benefit and take advantage of the fact that a lot of teachers have been exposed, a lot of children have been exposed to remote learning. But unfortunately, it's not been a great experience because neither the teachers nor the students in colleges or schools were trained to learn online. I think in the longer term, if you do it right, now that people have tried it, if you do it right, I think we have a really big opportunity in front of us.
Just to so weigh
Yes, Angie.
Around lessons from COVID. Like I said earlier on, COVID exposed the inequalities in society. And I know I speak primarily on Africa because that's where I'm best, but this has been across the world, right? The stark reality has really come very clearly, and we've been forced to look in the mirror and just see how unequal, right, the world is. But I also just want to, I'm a very optimistic person, but also we do not really have an option here. We're still breathing, we are here, and we need to build forward. We need to do something about this reality. We cannot be immobilized by what COVID has done. I think for me, the most important thing, a lesson from COVID has been, of course, the need to build for equity, but the power of collaboration. And us not overlooking the fact that we are united as the world. And I think as we think about all of these things and issues that we need to put on the table, I think we need to collaborate for equity. We need to collaborate to build systems that deliver to the child and to every child. We cannot continue to deliver education that's convenient. We cannot continue to go for low-hanging fruits or quick results at the expense of the majority of the children in the world. We need to think of every child to whom we owe education. And I just also want, I think, in respect of yesterday, to talk about climate action and its relation to education. And particularly because there is a very clear relationship between climate action and education, especially for girls' education. I know this firsthand and experience this in my work across Africa all the time. Just from the food insecurity and the havoc that wreaks on girls' access, completion, and performance in school, to the displacement of entire families, the destruction of schools, destruction of villages and communities from cyclones, and just the long, painful road to recovery. Add COVID to that mix. It's a nightmare. So I just want to be able to say that the best thing that we can do is let's be honest with ourselves and look at the lessons that we have learned and build for everybody. Let's go for justice for every child, irregardless of where they were born, irregardless of the challenges that they encounter, and do that for every child because we owe the future at least that.
I mean, isn't it sort of ironic, I think, that new changes, whether positive or negative, tend to advantage the already prior advantaged. So as we come up with new ways to use technology to promote education, it tends to be the more wealthy, families who benefit from that. When there's a negative shock like the pandemic, it also, it affects us all, but it affects lower income countries and neighborhoods the most. And so, there's an essential role for policy to play in trying to buffer those both the positive and the and the negative shocks. So one of our audience members was asking, like, how, we've been talking primarily about students learning from teachers and better tools to help students learn from teachers, whether through training teachers or through students directly using technology to interact with instructors. What about using technology to help students learn from fellow students, like even potentially break down some of the geographical boundaries and cultural boundaries between students to help students learn from students? Like, are you seeing anything exciting happening there? Anant?
Tom, absolutely. Yeah. This whole area is called peer learning. And any number of research studies have shown that peer learning can be incredibly effective. Now, my own experience has been at the college level, and I'll give you an example. On the edX platform, I remember we launched the first course on edX in 2012 in circuits and electronics. And we had 155,000 students all over the world taking the course. And so I was completely stressed out. My TAs and I said, look, we have to be on the Q&A discussion forum 7x24 answering all the questions. And one night at 1 a.m., I was sitting on the discussion forum and somebody asked a question. And I was trying to type an answer, but I don't type fast enough. And before I knew it, boom, there was a response from a student in Pakistan who tried to answer the other student's question. And then it was not quite the right answer, so I tried to correct the answer. And again, I typed slowly. And before I knew it, another student from Egypt had popped in with their version of the answer. And at that point, I kind of stepped back. And students from New Zealand, US, India, Africa, China, and all over the world were pitching in. And by 4 a.m. in the morning, they'd figured out the answer. And all I did was go in and say, hey, good answer, good job. And so I think there's incredible power to peer-to-peer learning and discovery. And I think if we can create tools to facilitate that and also enable students to learn from each other, there's also a teacher and student training here, which is teachers need to understand how to help students learn from each other and maybe pose questions, and rather than jumping with the answer, to step back and let the students talk to each other. So I think whether technology enabled or not in person, I think peer learning can be extraordinarily powerful.
I would like to just add a note of caution though, because again, I think it depends on the age groups we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So for younger children, and I would say at least up to the age of 10, you do learn a lot from your peers, but you learn from those peers because their brain is in the same room as your brain. We really do have social brains, and there are all these social cues that we're unaware of when we're interacting with real people that make a difference to our learning. So in terms of the motivation to learn, children like to be in groups with other children, and the teacher is very important because the teacher cares whether you're learning or not. And that's another thing that these online fora aren't really doing. There's a right answer. But a lot of learning for early years children, it's not geared to there being a right answer and you've got to tick the right box. It's all about how to problem solve, how to get inducted into this lifelong learning that we all can do by the time we're in our colleges and we know what we're looking for the answer for. But when you're younger, I think technology can't offer the same benefits that we can have from live interactions with adults who care about us or peers who care about us. I think that is getting lost out of these technological solutions because that isn't how the brain learns. That might be how a brain with a certain amount of expertise can learn after a certain amount of education. But at the beginning, you do need to be with other people.
I mean, could yes, Angie, yes.
I keep speaking over you. So I as somebody who grew up in a world of chalk and talk, where the calabash, as we used to call it when I was at school, calabash of wisdom was the teacher. And the only perceived expert within a class was the teacher. And we thought we had nothing to teach or we knew nothing and what we experienced didn't matter. I'm a huge fan of blended right? Where we ensure that there is space and opportunity for children to be able to learn from each other, to peer support each other, and as well as for an adult as appropriate, depending on the age group, to be able to also facilitate that, to make sure that happens appropriately in a place of safety and protection. We all know about online security and all that. I just want to give an example of an emerging innovation that we're involved in as an organization. So like I said earlier on, we've got an alumni network of young women that were supported through school by Chemfed from the most marginalized communities. And we are among the first in our communities to have gone this far. And when we came together, I want to talk about this whole power of coming together. When we came together for the first time, we are around 400 of us. It was the first time, personally, I knew that there were other girls in other districts who were struggling with the same things that I was struggling in school, that I wasn't alone. So there was that feeling of belonging, but also the sense of there is nothing really wrong with me. So when we decided to come together and pay it forward, support the next generation of learners coming through the system to also learn from what we're learning. And we went together with various experts, curriculum developers and everything, and came up with what we call the My Better World curriculum. But this was basically answering the question, what is it that would have wanted to learn with school? And this is about mainly child participation. How do you facilitate children to have conversations both about academics, but also about their context and what they're learning? And so I'll speak briefly about this and just want to share it because that's, anyway, that's the reason why I was nominated for, to be a laureate for the Yidan Prize. So what we have done, and particularly in this COVID crisis, I want to share what we did with the same curriculum. In response to the pandemic, the curriculum, the multimedia aspect of that was shared across Africa in partnership. We created that with Impact Ed International. It was shared across Africa and started being shown on various radios because, internet is an issue, but radios is what reaches most communities. It was shared by various radios to support national distance learning. And most students related with that. And the beauty of that was that learner guides were often the young women that graduated from the program could come and speak to some of these examples and contextualize it within the community. What am I just saying is that, there is no one size fits all. Not one piece of it can solve it. We need to be able to look at what are the risks and how do we mitigate them? What are the opportunities that are emerging and how do we leverage them? What we can't do is basically just say this doesn't work because it's got this weakness. The reality in life is, let's do cost-benefit analysis. Let's intervene and address a problem when we identify it. But by the end of the day, let's be responsive to children. They are social creatures, but they also need to be able to know that there's a world out there. I spent my first week in the UK in a limbo because this world is a world I only saw on TV. I didn't believe it actually existed. I didn't believe that. So it is important for us to also continue to make this world a global place. There's no, there's no closing the lid on this. The world is globalized now. It's a village. How do we mitigate the risk and leverage the opportunities for education and ensure others are not left behind?
So we're getting near the end of our time, and I just wanted to go back to something I noted at the beginning, and that is that we're all working in different ways, just with different toolkits, but on the same problem of like, spreading the same magic, like the same transformative power of education. To change lives in our own countries and with children and adults around the world. So the question for all of you, and I think we'll just go one by one, is just what concrete actions would be most important for the global community to take in the next few years to expand access and improve quality of education? Like, so what's the most important thing that we should be thinking about over the next couple of years? So Usha, why don't I start with you, and then Angie, and then Anant?
Well, I think sharing expertise is fundamental. So, for example, I was talking about the neuroscience of early learning, and we know a lot now about how to optimize learning environments for young children. but that knowledge isn't necessarily shared around the world. And it also has to be imparted to parents, because parents can believe that it's a waste of time for children to play, for example. Whereas if you have a teacher who's helping the child play in certain ways that boost their learning, then that's the most powerful form of early education, child-based learning. So it's sharing the expertise about how the brain learns. And also, as Angie said, learning difficulties are very poorly understood around the world. These children aren't lazy, they are trying very hard, but there's a biological difference in the way they're processing information. And so we need to support those children so that they can attain their, what's their full potential, rather than being held back by people thinking they're stupid or not trying. So for me, it's really about sharing expertise and having ways like this kind of webinar where expertise can be shared globally.
So Angie, how would you answer? What's the most important thing that the global community needs to do in the next couple of years to either expand access or improve quality of education?
The biggest savings is to keep education on the global agenda and to consciously and purposefully collaborate for education equity, for building education equity into the system for every child. I maintain that for every child, because every child deserves that. I just want to say that, we know, right, the price children and the world pay by not doing so. And COVID provided a glimpse of the world's interconnectedness, its shared vulnerability and the possibilities when we come together to solve a crisis. And education is in a crisis. I'm super excited about the Yidan Council of Luminaries, right, convened by the Yidan Prize Foundation in 2020 as an example of a firm step towards bringing together international and cross-disciplinary group of leading thinkers and actors to fuel education progress globally. So let's build together. Together is the word. And now is the time to build forward, acting on the pandemic lessons, but let's build equity into the system for every child. We have learned enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. Anant.
Tom, the one thing I've learned is that technology, whether fully or in a blended manner with in-person learning, and by the way, Usha, I completely agree with you that for younger children, blended learning where you combine a human being, a teacher, with technology is completely the way to go. So absolutely, totally grant that. I'm a big believer that technology is a democratizer, that even though technology might be adopted initially by the rich, ultimately technology allows anybody, anywhere to get access to a world-class education. You don't have to live in New Delhi to go to Delhi public school. Imagine if any kid anywhere in the world could get access to Delhi public school level teaching anywhere in the world. Technology will increase access. Enough studies have also shown that technology-enabled learning or blended learning even improves the quality of learning at the same time. So to me, what's really important is we have a one-time opportunity right now. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity right now, and it's something that COVID has given us. COVID enabled every single teacher, every single faculty member around the world to cut over to online learning. And most of them disliked online learning initially because they were not familiar with it. Many of my colleagues at MIT hated online learning, and when I would talk to them many years ago, they would say, oh, it's terrible, it's not for me. But today, everybody's using it. And I have had any number of colleagues say that the best lecture I've given in my career has been my first online lecture. And so everybody has tried it. And so I think we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here to take this affordance, this advantage that COVID has given us, and to help teachers and faculty members all over the world adopt online technology. And as COVID hopefully diminishes, for us not to let go, for us to continue making sure that technology-enabled learning is here to stay, that we train teachers and faculty in how to use technology to teach, and particularly in a blended fashion so that we can combine in-person learning in schools all over the world. I think we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the next 2 years. We will never see this opportunity ever again, and so we have to do this now.
So that's a great hopeful note to close us out on. So thanks to the panelists and thanks to the audience for joining us. And I know we all believe in spreading the power of education to transform lives. So I look forward to working with you all to continue to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks.